The phone rang when she was already halfway out the door, coat on, keys in hand, mind somewhere else entirely. Unknown number. She almost ignored it. Most people do. Life teaches you not to stop for things you don't recognize. But something made her pause, not intuition, not fear, just a quiet hesitation that felt heavier than habit. She answered without greeting, already prepared to end the call quickly. At first, there was only silence. Then a voice, unsure, slightly out of breath, asked if this was still her number. He sounded nervous, like someone who hadn't planned what to say beyond the first sentence. He explained he found her contact saved in an old phone, a backup he almost threw away. They hadn't spoken in years. Not since life had moved them in different directions without ceremony or conflict. Just distance. Just time. Hearing his voice felt strange, not painful, not comforting, just familiar in a way she hadn't expected. They talked longer than either intended. About surface things at first. Work. Cities. Weather. The kind of conversation people use to test whether it's safe to go deeper. Gradually, the pauses grew longer, and the honesty crept in. He admitted he had thought about calling many times, then decided against it, convinced it wouldn't matter anymore. She said she used to imagine what she would say if he ever did, and now realized none of it fit this moment. Time had changed the shape of everything. Standing there in the hallway, she forgot she was late. Forgot where she was going. The conversation didn't pull her backward into nostalgia. It anchored her in the present. They spoke about how different they were now, how mistakes had taught them more than successes ever did. There was no regret in their voices, just recognition. The understanding that what they had shared once had been real, even if it hadn't lasted. When the call ended, she stood still for a moment, phone warm in her hand. The city outside continued as usual. Nothing dramatic had happened. No closure speech. No rekindling. Just two people acknowledging that they had crossed paths once and left marks on each other's lives. That was enough. Later that evening, she thought about how close she had come to letting the call go unanswered. How easily moments like that disappear forever without making noise. She didn't believe everything happens for a reason. But she believed some things happen because you choose to stay open just a second longer than necessary. She placed the phone on the table and finally left the apartment, stepping into the evening lighter than before. Not because the past had returned, but because it no longer needed to. Sometimes, the calls you almost ignore aren't meant to change your future. They're meant to remind you that you've lived, and that's already something worth answering for. The days after the call felt unexpectedly calm. Not quiet in an empty way, but settled, like a room after furniture has finally been arranged properly. She kept thinking she would replay the conversation in her head, analyze every word, search for hidden meaning. It didn't happen. Instead, the call slipped naturally into memory, not as a turning point, but as a marker, proof that some chapters don't need to reopen to be acknowledged. A few days later, he sent a short message. Nothing heavy. Just a line saying it was good to hear her voice and that he hoped the timing hadn't been inconvenient. She smiled at that. Timing had been inconvenient, yes, but in the most honest way. She replied simply, saying she was glad she answered. That was all. No long explanations. No emotional follow-up. The conversation didn't continue, and that felt right. Some connections don't require maintenance to remain meaningful. What surprised her most was how the call affected her relationships in the present. She found herself listening more carefully, interrupting less, saying things sooner instead of waiting for the perfect moment. The call reminded her how easily words get delayed until they lose their place. She began choosing clarity over comfort in small ways, honest replies, direct questions, conversations that used to feel intimidating now felt necessary. One evening, while walking home, she noticed how many people around her were absorbed in their phones, moving automatically through familiar streets. She wondered how many calls went unanswered every day, how many chances passed quietly because hesitation felt safer than engagement. She didn't judge it. She understood it. But she also understood now that being available, even briefly, could change how a moment landed in your life. Weeks later, she deleted the old missed call log without ceremony. Not because it hurt, but because it no longer needed to exist. The past had spoken. She had listened. That was enough. The call didn't restart a relationship or repair something broken. It did something subtler and more lasting. It reminded her that presence is a choice, and that sometimes, answering doesn't mean committing, it simply means acknowledging that something mattered. And from then on, whenever her phone rang and she felt the urge to ignore it out of habit, she paused. Just for a second. Not because every call deserved an answer, but because she had learned the value of choosing awareness over avoidance. Some calls don't change your life. They just change how you listen to it.